Hello, and welcome to MSUA Game Changers webcast, where we speak with satellite and mobile connectivity thought leaders about industry trends and share what you need to know about the future of mobile satellite communications. I'm your host, Roger Lanto, and I'm excited to introduce Robert Landsfield, founder and CEO of Skymira. Skymira is a leader in radio over IP through satellite and other IP networks. Under Robert's leadership, Skymira has created innovative solutions for land mobile radio challenges that provide everywhere radio coverage, advanced radio and device interoperability, and reliable GPS tracking. Skymira's radio over IP solutions augment existing radio systems to eliminate coverage gaps, create advanced interoperability, connect widely distributed teams, and provide reliable GPS tracking and mapping. Law enforcement departments, federal agencies, commercial businesses, first responders, and energy providers are among Skymira's users. All right, Robert, that was a mouthful. Thank you for putting up with that. But let's dive right in. So I find that people tend to take wireless communications for granted and don't realize that we have a problem with wireless connectivity until it's too late. And it's on my mind, and maybe on a lot of people's mind, in view of the recent crash at Reagan National, where you have two different wireless systems for communicating and trying to avoid collisions. I think the helicopters are using one system, and planes are using a different system, but wireless is implicated in safety in that circumstance. But whether you're talking about an enterprise application, something purely recreational, or an emergency response scenario, what is the current state of wireless communications? Are we making progress, or are things getting worse?
Well, so I guess you could think of that really in terms of two issues or problems. The first one is, gaps in coverage. So LTE, cellular, 5G, some of the airband radios that you had described in your opening remarks. That's always been kind of, the issue. And in our expertise, land mobile radio, that's especially a problem given with our customer base that operates in very widely distributed areas and, areas that it's really not feasible to have a tower where you're going to have 100% coverage. The good news is that, with these low Earth orbit constellations being deployed, and Starlink is leading the way there. Amazon's Project Kuiper is not too far behind. Telesat just announced their I believe it's Lightspeed, low Earth orbit constellations. So the area or the problem with gaps in coverage, I think, is going to become less and less of a problem with all these new networks that are coming online. The second issue, I think, is what you, again, alluded to, which is kind of interoperability. So we're getting nice networks up in the sky and getting close as we're going to get to 100% coverage, in wireless communications. But at the end of the day, if you have various agencies with different types of radios, airband, P25, all of that, you're still going to have some interoperability issues. And that's where the application providers come in. That's one of our areas of expertise is tying those type of systems together. So, in answer to your question, we're definitely making great progress in terms of the coverage and the, all of the networks that are becoming available. The price point in those networks is dropping dramatically, which is making it very affordable for a wide range of users. And that is allowing companies like Skymira and others in the interoperability space trying to solve those problems so that when different agencies roll up onto a scene that typically wouldn't be operating together, now that they can have communications without gaps, but more importantly, be able to very quickly communicate between their two systems.
Yeah, I guess and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm a little bit new to this, but it seems like we're talking about a pre-9/11 and a post-9/11 world, and a sort of a post-FirstNet world. But still, when we're looking at the TV and seeing all those responders, and wondering how they are actually communicating with one another, and how those two different systems, for example, I think at the press conference over the weekend, the representative was from the FAA was talking about UHF versus VHF communications. Again, different frequencies for the helicopters versus the airplane, the jet. You talk about interoperability. How does that work? I mean, we all take it for granted that all these emergency responders are going to have their act together, but that's not such a simple thing.
Right. And I mean, that dates all the way back to, pre 9/11, as you'd mentioned. That was the genesis of FirstNet, to have a dedicated quote unquote network that was available to the government, to first responders and so forth. But again, that's the wireless, that's the internet connectivity, if you will. These first responders are still plugging various types of radios, quote unquote, into this network. So, the traditional use of a land mobile radio is, or even airband aircraft radios, is RF, right? So I key up my PTT button on my radio. That's an RF transmission from that radio to a tower. And then something happens from there. It goes to a dispatch console or air traffic controller or somebody like that. So that's one aspect of it here. These new networks that are coming on, and indeed FirstNet, that's an IP-based network. So basically, we're talking about the internet, right? So there are going to be devices that are on the market that basically take, in many cases, just the audio, but in other cases, an entire protocol like a P25 stream from a first responders radio. So P25 is law enforcement, emergency management, things like that. When you key up that radio, in addition to the audio, you're getting what we call the subscriber ID, which is basically their call sign. You're getting the GPS location if it's enabled on that radio, and if they hit the emergency button, you're getting all of that, all in that PTT. So all of that information is sent along the system. But again, if you've got, UHF, VHF, 700-800 megahertz is another statewide systems that are being deployed quite widely. They're still going to have problems communicating ad hoc, where people are arriving on scene, where, there's no pre-planning for that. So, there are definitely devices. That's one, we've got a new device coming out that's in a ruggedized Pelican case, where you can take portable radios, all these different type of portable radios, plug them into this box, and they will be interoperable, in addition to be able to transmit that information over a low Earth orbit satellite or an LTE network or something along that line. So there's definitely a lot of progress in that area, but there's a lot of work to do. And then, the flip side of that is the price point of these networks and the connectivity is dropping so dramatically. So now these agencies that traditionally, especially on the local level, would have a hard time affording something like that. A lot of the Starlink service provider or service plans today are almost as inexpensive as an LTE data plan. And the terminals themselves, those Starlink minis, are less than an iPhone. So we're getting to the point where, these state and local agencies, rural electric co-ops and things, entities of that nature now can afford these devices and this connectivity and be able to increase their safety. At the end of the day, it boils down to safety and communications amongst all of these various agencies and enterprise applications. So
satellite becomes kind of an over-the-top kind of a solution.
Exactly. It's like augmenting, you can think of it as augmenting an RF network, right? So we recently participated in an exercise down in Virginia, and that was the entire scenario there was, I have no RF network. Is there something that can arrive on scene that allow the various, county sheriff to be able to talk to a state trooper, that type of thing. So that is an evolution that is very rapidly evolving. And as I mentioned, the price points are coming down to the place where it's really, becoming to a point where even at the local level, it's becoming so inexpensive, affordable that everybody will be able to afford this technology and be able to integrate it and take advantage of it when, the need arises, whether, it's, another storm or something along that line, or in this case.
So it sounds like you were talking about your Go Kit. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, so that's our brand name for it. So it's basically a ruggedized Pelican case kit that has some hardware integrated into it, as well as, power supplies and things like that for not just Starlink, but, all of the L-band terminals. There's still a good need for, geostationary L-band is more applicable when weather and a heavy canopy and things like that, come into being. So with these low Earth orbit networks coming out, it doesn't necessarily mean that the existing geostationary satellites have no place. They definitely have a place, given certain type of use cases, in addition to, augmenting the low Earth orbit with, maybe backhaul and redundancy, multi-orbit type things like that.
And help me understand the business model of integrating Starlink in there. Does that make Skymira, in effect, a Starlink reseller, or is it something a little different?
So in our application, so we've been in business for about 25 years. We've always written software applications for whatever network was available at the time. So this predates BGAN, actually. So when we first started, they were little satellite packet data terminals, 50-byte packets, and all of that. So in our business model, yes, we have to purchase and resell satellite airtime, but it's generally bundled in with the service that you're contracting with Skymira. So today, that's, I've got a device with a push to talk button on it. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I want to be able to hit that button and talk to somebody elsewhere, really anywhere on Earth these days. And then the second piece of that is we're still quite heavily involved in GPS tracking. We do fleet-wide type of tracking, but our specialty is really, for example, the P25 radio that I had mentioned. We're able to actually track the portable radio, which means now we're tracking the firefighter or the law enforcement officer when they're dismounted out of their vehicle, so that their tactical operations knows exactly where they are, situational awareness and things like that. So our business model is basically integrating the service that you're using Skymira for, GPS tracking, push-to-talk applications, interoperability, and so the airtime is bundled into that service. It's kind of a one type of service on the line.
And with these catastrophic situations emerging, is anything being done to sort of pre-position equipment, so it's not like a scramble at the last minute?
Right. So, well, there's a couple of things actually being done with certain agencies. Number one, again, because the price point and the availability of these networks is such that they're actually trying to integrate them into their daily operations when it makes sense. And the price point is coming down to a level where they can actually afford to do that, particularly with some of this low Earth orbit. So that's the best scenario, because now you're using it every day. It's not like, we've had a situation arise, we got to go and pull this equipment off the shelf that hopefully have been tested. So that's one thing we're definitely seeing in the marketplace, both at the enterprise level as well as emergency responders. But those that doesn't make sense, where they only need a kit for when FEMA, for example, FEMA isn't deployed unless there's actually an emergency. So they would be an example where they're going to have a cache of these devices sitting on the shelf. They periodically train with them. They make sure they're working and that their personnel actually knows how to use them. So, but one of the big game changers, try not to overuse that term, but is that agencies and enterprises realizing that they can supplement their existing communications in standard operating procedure every day.
Well, okay, you said the F word, FEMA. Obviously, they're in the middle of the conversation. They always were, but now more than ever, of course, with questions being raised about the efficacy of how they're organized and how they respond. I'm sure changes were already happening. How has FEMA's operations evolved and impacted your interaction with FEMA and with states, because they're right in that interface, and that seems to be the core of this debate, whether the states manage this response or whether the federal government gets involved. And sorry to put you on the spot, but
no, it's so. The easy answer is that it's, with the new technology and everything that's going on in Washington, D.C., the conversation is really turbocharged. So has there been actual changes to date? No, not dramatic changes, but those discussions, I think, are finally ongoing to the point where, again, it goes back to what's rapidly evolving in these various networks to make all of this, feasible, to be able to make these changes. In terms of whether FEMA is going to manage this or the states are going to start to take over, or National Guard or whatever, that's an ongoing conversation that at least I'm not aware of what the answer to that is, but I do know that it's in discussion just about everywhere and everybody you talk to. So from the top down to the operational level, everybody is trying to make the situation better, I guess, to the point everybody understands that there's a problem, for all the ones that we talked about, interoperability, and is this available? And even in North Carolina, that was a very big example of an area that traditionally wouldn't have that problem, but they've had all of the flooding in Asheville in that area there, and it's still got a long ways to go to be rebuilt. So I'm very optimistic that there are being lessons learned here, and they'll be applied in the appropriate way.
And Starlink, and I'm about to head to another industry event, the Small Sat Symposium, and Starlink tends to become simultaneously this boogeyman and this enabler. And so how would you describe that tension between this huge player in the market, and you mentioned competition is emerging, and yet they are facilitating commercial opportunities for others?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. I mean, when Starlink first came onto the market, by their own admission, they were a consumer company. So we want to put, Starlink dishes on every household that doesn't have internet connectivity. And it didn't take long for agencies and various companies in the industry to recognize it's like, the capability of these various terminals. So, so it's definitely, it's in my opinion, it's a huge enabler. There was I read an article a while ago that Nova Space, a consulting firm, released or published a report where today's industry, satellite industry, is about $600 billion. They're predicting within 10 years that the industry will be $1 trillion market. And the interesting thing I found about that 300 and some odd billion dollar growth was that they're predicting it's the applications that are going to drive that growth, number one. The second thing is, if you think about that scale, to me, that means there's a lot of people that today are not using satellite, whether it's for a consumer-based application or, again, getting back to these state and local government agencies that today never use satellite, or maybe they've got one terminal sitting on a shelf somewhere. But, the way the market, is evolving from a price perspective, you have to have a lot more new users in there to generate $300 billion of growth, inside of 10 years. So to me, that's the exciting thing, is it's an enabler for various technologies, various applications. and it's being embraced, quite widely by all of these new users that traditionally had never used satellite.
So lowering the price opens up new opportunities. Organizations that weren't using satellite at all start looking at satellites or start using satellite. Those that were using satellite and off on a ad hoc basis suddenly realize, as you say, they can use it on a daily basis, use it all the time, start relying on it.
That's right. Yep.
So you've talked a little bit about already about how your business has evolved. Can you go into a little bit more detail, how the nature of the business opportunities or the mix of your business? Obviously, there's a wide range of applications, a wide range of sectors. We tend to associate satellite with, or I do anyway, for some reason, with emergency response. But it's a core activity of the Defense Department, enterprise applications. So how has that mix evolved at Skymira?
So it's really over the years, again, I'm dating myself as well. We're predate, cellular internet, right? LTE and 3G back in the day and all of that. So back then, the applications were stood up where, maritime has always been a traditional user. That's how Skymira started, actually. We were writing applications for coastal maritime tugboats and offshore supply boats and things like that. That was the genesis of the company way back when. We've always done a very good job of listening to the customers. So we get an application stood up for them. They're using it on a daily basis. And they're like, it would be great if we could, if you could make it do this, that would even help us out even further. So that's kind of been the evolution of Skymira. So you fast forward that today, the P25 product that we have that operates over these low Earth orbit networks and geostationary was exactly that. So we had basically L-band terminals on vehicles connected to push-to-talk radio over IP gateways that we could also, with a cable, connect to their land mobile radio, right? So the ranger, the officer can dismount out of the vehicle, walk away from the vehicle, key up his portable, and still get back to the dispatch over the satellite network. We had two different customers. It's like, we love it that we now know where the vehicle is and that the officer, the ranger, firefighter can use it when he's out of the vehicle. We really need to know where that person is, which means we need to know where the radio is. And so that started us on the project, our P25 IPR, to be able to not just send the audio over it, but take that P25 frames, which is a standard. P25 is a radio standard that's been in existence for more than 2 decades. But we've taken that, and that sort of started us on the project. This is probably dating 3 or 4 years ago back now we started that. So now we know we can get we know where the location of the officer is. If he hits the emergency alert button on his portable radio, they know exactly where it is. It goes through the system. And again, these new networks now are enabling where traditionally, we'd have to hit a tower somewhere, whether that's LTE or an RF tower. Now we've got satellites overhead where we're getting pretty darn close to 100% connectivity. So no matter where I am, I can hit that button and I know that somebody's going to come to my aid. So that's really the evolution of Skymira is, do a pretty good job of listening to our customers. And when they ask us for something, if it's at all feasible, we work very hard to bring that into the market and provide them the tools that they're asking for.
Do we still have white zones somewhere?
They're becoming smaller and smaller. Well, that's the good news. I mean, that's the very exciting news that, is really occurring. And like we've done a lot of testing with the Starlink. We test these networks extensively before we actually put them into critical communications. And I live in Connecticut here. So the first thing we do is, we've got plenty of forests around here. So we drive it under, very heavily wooded forests, along with the B-GAN and the L-band and things of that nature. And we're very pleasantly surprised that it maintained its connectivity even through some pretty dense forests. The second thing that we did was we did some testing where I had to drive through the mountains in Montana this is a couple of months ago. It was about a 3-hour drive. And I was going through some pretty heavy duty passes, 6,000 foot mountains on either side. And I had a 2-hour WhatsApp phone call over Wi-Fi, basically Wi-Fi phone calls, that we didn't drop the call once. I had a continuous 2-hour conversations over that network that had I not had, that terminal mag mounted to the roof of the vehicle, I would have barely had a 30-minute conversation because LTE is just not, in existence in a good chunk of that country. So, the white zones, the gaps in coverage and all of that are definitely being reduced. And it's becoming affordable enough to be able to, utilize that in a variety of different applications.
And we're almost through here. What's the latest and greatest from Skymira?
So 2 things really, which I've talked about both. So one is the interoperability. That continues to be a problem. We continue to have a lot of conversation with our customer base about, I need to make this simpler. I don't need to bring a radio technician with me, which, you need in a lot of the devices out there that he can program this and get these radios going. I want to be able to bring a radio, a cable, and a box and plug it in and start talking to everybody else that's plugged into that box and be able to backhaul that audio, to a tactical operations center, something like that. So we're now on our 3rd generation Go kit, and this next gen, is really getting to the point it's going to be plug and play. So there's only so many models of radios that these various agencies utilize. And it's very easy to just have a cache of those type of cables. So somebody rolls up, you just plug it in and they can communicate with each other. So that's the first thing. The second thing has to do with the GPS tracking. I mentioned that we have the ability to track actual P25 radios. There are other radio protocols out there. DMR is another protocol that we have it on our roadmap to be able to basically track those type of devices as well. There's a lot of smartphone PTT applications out there that make sense for a lot of users. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot of users that need the form factor of a good old-fashioned portable radio with just a PTT button. They're operating under duress in a lot of instances, and they don't want to be hitting a screen trying to log into a screen. So, those 2 types of devices will be around for a very long time. So we're trying to integrate the GPS tracking as well as the other types of data on there to provide the best situational awareness that, again, these networks are enabling to be able to do that just about anywhere on the planet, really, these days.
And where do I get information about Skymira? So
we work very hard to just try to put educational material on our website. So the best place to go, www.skymira.com. There's a huge blog, a lot of blogs on there that are educational in nature. It's not just, here's the nice shiny thing. It's like, this is why this works. Here's how you plug it in. And then probably linking in with, into our company page on LinkedIn is another way to stay up to date with, the latest announcements and product releases and those blogs.
Well, I feel safer already knowing you're out there. So thanks, Bob.
Okay, well, thank you.
And so I want to thank the Mobile Satellite Users Association for hosting these sessions. You can learn more about the MSUA at msua.org. You can learn how to get our weekly newsletter that gives you updates on everything that's happening in the industry and shares information about upcoming events. And you can also find out how to become a member. And nominations for the 2025 Mobile Satellite Innovation Awards are open until February 10th. We look forward to seeing you next time on MSUA's Game Changers webcast. Thanks a lot, Bob.
Thank you, Roger.
Okay.